In November of AD 35, near the small town of Wuyang, south of Chengdu, several thousand crack troops of the Eastern Route Han army, deep in their campaign against Chu, had set up a chain of encampments stretching for miles, with red banners fluttering across the sky. Just a few dozen kilometers to the north lay Chengdu, the capital of the Chengjia regime. With the main Shu army already drawn away, Chengdu was virtually a prize waiting to be taken. The Han forces rested briefly, awaiting the Chengjia Emperor's response to the surrender letter written by the Han Son of Heaven, Liu Shu, and stood ready to attack at any moment. The cavalry sent out during the day were returning in groups. Some brought back fresh surrendering soldiers. Others reported that towns ahead had been abandoned. Inside the command tent, the Han Commander-in-Chief, Peng, summoned his officers to discuss strategy. After going over every detail, he casually asked, "What is this place called?" meaning the spot where the main camp was pitched. Someone called out the answer: Peng Wang, the death of Peng. Although Peng was a battle-hardened general, the ill-omened name still gave him quite a start. He even considered moving the camp. But night had already fallen completely. The army had just finished a long march, and the various units were spread out over separate encampments. A hasty nighttime shift could easily cause chaos. He could only order tightened security and resolve to strike camp at first light. That very day, a man arrived outside the camp, claiming to be a slave who had escaped from the Shu army. The Han forces had been receiving large numbers of surrendering troops and deserters, so such a person was not unusual. After questioning him, the guards brought him into the camp. After nightfall, the campfires gradually died down. The soldiers, worn out from days of marching, settled to rest, while sentries paced along the ramparts and the occasional whinny of war horses sounded in the distance. But the so-called deserter slipped out of his tent. Evading the patrols, he made his way past the areas where supplies and weapons were stacked, drawing closer to the central command tent. Because the army had only just reached Wuyang and had already received orders to move camp the next day, the Han camp was in disarray. Nobody paid any attention to a surrendered runaway slave. Seizing the moment, the fugitive approached the lightly guarded Peng, drew a hidden weapon, let out a great shout, and drove his blade through Peng's chest. He immediately pulled the blade out and stabbed again and again, determined to kill. The guards, now jolted into action, fell upon the assassin with swords and spears, but the man, indifferent to his own life, completed his lethal work as if welcoming death. The assassin was hacked to pieces, and Peng lay in a pool of blood, bleeding uncontrollably, and died within moments. Peng's deputy immediately sealed the news, urgently summoned the officers, and struck camp at once, withdrawing from Wuyang. They did not know whether the assassination would be followed by a massive attack, nor whether the Chengjia Emperor Gongsun Shu had already led his army back to relieve Chengdu. All they could do was hurriedly draw in their formations and choose a new defensive position. A victory that had been within easy reach thus dissolved into smoke and ashes. The Han forces, which had thrust deep into enemy territory, were suddenly stranded deep in hostile country. And this was not the first assassination. Only 2 months earlier, the commander of the Han Northern Route Army had likewise been assassinated. The war against Chu was the final campaign of Liu Shu's reunification of the Han realm. Yet the ferocity of the resistance, the reversals of fortune, and the way events remained treacherous and perilous right to the very end made it exceptional. This campaign featured not only assassinations, miraculous strategic outflanking, deceitful maneuvering, and desperate fighting, but also China's first emperor to die in battle. Today, let us reconstruct in full the final battle of the Eastern Han unification, the Battle of Chengdu. The man who ordered Peng's assassination was the Chengjia Emperor, Gongsun Shu. A little over a decade earlier, he had been nothing more than a local official appointed by Wang Mang to govern the Shu commandery west of Chengdu. After the Qin dynasty collapsed, armies everywhere raised the banner of restoring the Han. Two armed forces, each tens of thousands strong, entered Chengdu in succession, but quickly began looting the populace. Seizing the opportunity, Gongsun Shu rallied the local powerful families and proclaimed that he would expel these outside armies. He forged credentials in the name of a Han envoy, granting himself the seals and ribbons of general, Grand Administrator of Shu Commandery, and Supreme Governor of Yi Province. With just over 1,000 elite soldiers, he rose in arms. By the time he reached Chengdu, his followers had swelled to several thousand. Gongsun Shu defeated one of the outside armies, absorbed its remaining troops, and soon controlled Chengdu and the surrounding region. The Chengjia Emperor then dispatched over 10,000 men into Shu in an attempt to take over the area. Gongsun Shu ordered his younger brother to confront them at Mianzhu, where they routed this central government force. The outside Han army could not enter Chengdu, and the local commanderies and counties began to turn to Gongsun Shu. Thereafter, he first declared himself king of Shu, making Chengdu his capital, and sent troops to seize Hanzhong to the north and Ba Commandery to the east, putting the main routes in and out of Shu under his control. In AD 25, the very year Liu Shu formally proclaimed himself emperor in Hebei, Gongsun Shu did likewise, adopting the dynastic name Chengjia. As chaos and warfare continued in the north, famine and conflict drove large numbers of officials, scholars and refugees into Shu. Many defeated commanders from Guangzhou and Jing province also came with their remnants to offer their allegiance. Gongsun Shu granted them offices and titles, established a full bureaucracy in Chengdu, minted coins, expanded the army, stockpiled grain, and built fortifications in Hanzhong. His domain eventually covered most of what is now southwestern China. Over the following years, the Eastern Han armies wiped out the Red Eyebrows, crushed various separatist regimes in the east, and then shifted their main strength westwards. Gongsun Shu did not seize the moment to strike before the Eastern Han was firmly established. Instead, he relied on the forbidding terrain to preserve his power and only supported outside forces that could check Liu Shu. The most important of these was Wei Xiao, who controlled the Longyu region. Gongsun Shu repeatedly sent troops and grain to aid him, hoping this buffer would endure. In AD 34, Longyu was finally defeated. The Eastern Han had now eliminated the major rivals in the north and east and could concentrate troops, grain and boats from all regions onto the last remaining target, Gongsun Shu. Gongsun Shu's ability to hold out in Chengdu did not depend primarily on the size of his army, but on Shu itself. The Chengdu plain was fertile enough to sustain a large population and army indefinitely, while it was hemmed in by high mountains and deep gorges. Any outside army wishing to enter could advance only along a few fixed routes. To the north, one had to cross the Qinling and other ranges that divide northern and southern China. To the east, one had to go against the current of the Yangtze and pass through the Three Gorges. Both were formidable natural barriers that were extremely difficult for large armies to overcome in the agrarian age. In AD 33, while Longyu was still putting up its final resistance, Gongsun Shu decided to push his defensive line beyond the gorges by seizing strongpoints outside the eastern entrance. He sent tens of thousands of men downstream on rafts and warships. They advanced swiftly, defeating the Han commanders stationed along the river one after another. The several Han units guarding the eastern mouth of the Three Gorges were split up and crushed, and the survivors retreated east. For the first time, Gongsun Shu's forces crossed the gorges, pushing the front directly into western Jing province, just downstream from today's Three Gorges Dam, and began transforming the area into an integrated water-land defensive line to block the Yangtze. They established two strongholds on either bank, built a pontoon bridge across the river by linking boats and rafts, and erected tall towers on the bridge for garrisoning troops and shooting. Under the bridge and in the channel, they drove dense wooden stakes, some fitted with reversed barbs, which could block hulls and snag warships attempting to struggle upstream. Once a Han fleet was brought to a halt by the stakes, the Shu forces could attack simultaneously from the bridge towers and both banks. Beyond the river, the Shu army occupied the hills on both sides and built camps on the high ground, integrating the infantry and the fleet into a single system. If the Han attacked only the pontoon bridge, the hilltop defenders could reinforce from above. If they first tried to seize the riverbank camps, their troop transports would have to land on a waterway dominated by the Shu forces. The entire defensive line was not a single isolated stockade, but a combination of pontoon bridge, bridge towers, underwater stakes, warships, and hilltop fortifications. It lay across the eastern entrance to the Three Gorges, and directly across the Han army's main supply route into Shu. This defensive line proved highly effective. Once the main Han army responded, it launched several counterattacks, all of which achieved nothing. Peng, as the commander of the eastern route Han forces, stopped these piecemeal offensives. He withdrew downstream, requisitioned timber, artisans and boat-handling soldiers, and began building large numbers of warships, towered ships, assault ships, and fast multi-oared vessels. The towered ships were designed to carry troops and crossbowmen. The assault ships had reinforced hulls intended to ram the waterborne fortifications directly. The fast ships relied on numerous oars for speed. Thousands of war vessels of various sizes gradually assembled, while the southern commanderies began shipping grain and boat crews to the front. In the spring of AD 35, more than 60,000 Han troops and 5,000 war horses completed their concentration, and the campaign against Shu was formally launched. Liu Xiu personally appointed Peng with full command authority. After carefully studying the Shu line, which appeared to have no gaps, Peng decided to rely on the Han's overwhelming superiority in numbers and naval equipment and to storm it directly. He called for volunteers among the troops for a suicide squad, promising a rich reward to the first men to board the pontoon bridge. A fierce officer led a group of soldiers onto warships and charged straight from the Han formation toward the middle of the river. The Shu forces quickly began shooting arrows, and the defenders on the bridge towers started hurling torches and stones. The attacking ship drove into the wooden stakes and was soon firmly snagged by the iron hooks. The charging officer did not order the hooks to be cleared. Instead, he had his men light all the torches they had brought, and facing the arrow storm, drew close to the bridge and hurled fire onto the towers and the ropes binding the boats together. The Shu troops tried to suppress the Han force from the bridge, and close combat broke out on the narrow decks and along the bridge's edge. At that moment, a fierce east wind suddenly sprang up over the river. Yes, an east wind, just like the one that would blow at Red Cliffs 2 centuries later. The flames spread rapidly westward along the wooden bridge, the ropes and the towers. The Shu troops could not dismantle the bridge in time, and the defenders on it began retreating toward the banks. The vessels moored upstream also fell into disorder because of the fire and thick smoke. Once the pontoon bridge was ablaze, the entire Han army attacked. Their warships advanced with the east wind, some smashing through the loosened stakes, others pulling up to the banks to land infantry on the slopes. The Shu army had relied on the bridge to link their fleet and the shore camps. Now the river defense collapsed first, and the garrisons on both banks were cut off from support. Shu commanders were killed or captured in the chaos, and only one senior general managed to escape. Vast numbers of Shu soldiers leapt into the river, trying to swim upstream or to the opposite bank, and thousands were swept away by the current. The defensive line that Gongsun Shu had spent 2 years building at the eastern entrance of the Three Gorges was destroyed in a single day. The Han army did not pause to clear the battlefield, but continued upstream in their ships. Passing through the gorges and entering the Sichuan basin, they found towns and cities along the way beginning to surrender. Peng forbade looting. The local people came out to greet him with food and wine, which he did not accept, asking only that they maintain order and continue providing supplies for the army. After reaching the fortified mountain city of Jiangzhou, modern Chongqing, Peng judged that its walls were too strong and its granaries too full to be taken quickly. So he left a small force to contain it, and led the main army bypassing the city to the west, seizing the surrounding grain-producing areas and capturing large quantities of provisions, while also achieving complete control of the Yangtze waterway. More vessels, soldiers and grain now flowed continuously into Shu along the river. While the Eastern Route army was crossing the Three Gorges, the northern prong of the invasion was also making progress. In the 6th month of AD 35, the Northern Route Han army, under Commander Lai Shi, began their advance south, defeating the Shu defensive forces south of the Long Mountains. Just when they had broken through the natural obstacles and the road ahead seemed wide open, the Chengjia forces sent an assassin who murdered the northern commander Lai Shi. With the dagger still in his body, Lai Shi immediately summoned his deputy to give final instructions. Seeing his commander gravely wounded, the deputy bowed his head and wept. But Lai Shi rebuked him to his face and ordered him to listen to the deployment first. Then he dictated a report to Liu Shu describing the military situation and his wound, had someone pull out the blade, and died shortly afterwards. The northern route had just been opened, and the commander was suddenly dead. Liu Shu appointed a new general to take over the northern army, and in the 7th month, he personally traveled to Chang'an to be near the front, directing the mobilization of troops to sustain the northern offensive. Around the time of Lai Shi's assassination, Peng on the eastern route had already crossed the Three Gorges and bypassed Jiangzhou. Gongsun Shu anticipated that the Han army would continue advancing westwards along the existing road. So he concentrated the bulk of his forces east of Chengdu, and also sent over 20,000 men to hold Huangshi near Jiangzhou, intending to block Peng from 2 directions. But the Han army did not attack head-on. Peng left his flags, field fortifications, and part of his troops in place, instructing a subordinate officer to pretend they were the main force. Then he led his best troops back along the Yangtze waterway, secretly transferred them via another river, and descended on Huangshi from the Shu army's flank and rear. The Huangshi defenders quickly collapsed. After taking Huangshi, Peng again did not stop. He ordered his men to march day and night, covering over 1,000 kilometers in a relentless forced march, bypassing the main Shu forces entirely, and suddenly appeared at Wuyang, just a few dozen kilometers from Chengdu. The historical records do not give the exact strength and composition of this lightning thrust, but it was probably a combination of waterborne assault and elite cavalry that produced this miraculous strategic leap. When Gongsun Shu received the news that Wu Yang had fallen, he struck the ground with his staff and cried out in shock, "What kind of divine troops are these?" Yet he had no way immediately to bring his army back to relieve Chengdu, because at that very moment, the token force left behind by the Eastern Route Army had also launched an offensive, primarily using tens of thousands of recently surrendered soldiers. The deputy commander of the remaining Han Eastern forces deployed infantry and cavalry along the hills, planted banners everywhere on the high ground, and ordered his men to beat drums and raise war cries to create the impression that massive reinforcements had arrived. The Shu army climbed to high ground and saw the Han banners filling the valleys, believed a fresh main force had come, and their morale, already shaken by the fall of Wu Yang, began to waver. The Han forces attacked. Over 10,000 Shu soldiers were killed or drowned. Their general fled back to Chengdu, while large numbers of his troops surrendered, with those submitting to the Han numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The Shu forces that Gongsun Shu had deployed east and north of Chengdu were split apart and routed by the combination of the astonishing outflanking movement and the frontal blow. At this juncture, the strategic situation was as follows. The Eastern Route Han army had occupied Wu Yang, with cavalry pressing towards Guangwu. The Northern Route army, though temporarily slowed, still held the area south of the Long Mountains and was building a new command structure. It was at this critical moment that Gongsun Shu once again dispatched assassins, who killed the Eastern Route commander Peng, bringing both the eastern and northern advances to a halt when they were closest to Chengdu. This bought Gongsun Shu time to reassemble his forces. After Peng's death, the Eastern Route Han army was unable to advance further. Its forward elements were deep in the Chengdu plain, while the follow-on flotillas were still strung out through the gorges. A deputy officer temporarily took command, but could only hold the camp and tighten the lines. He did not dare launch any new attacks on his own authority. In the 12th month of AD 35, the Han Grand Marshal Wu Han led about 30,000 men upstream. This army consisted of garrison veterans, newly recruited soldiers and convict troops. They entered Shu aboard warships. As the nominal supreme military commander of the Han, Grand Marshal Wu Han brought not just a fresh, untried army, but a fully unified chain of command. In the first month of the following year, Wu Han led the Eastern Route army up the river once more, pushing toward Chengdu. The Shu forces attempted to block the fleet at the crossing points, but Wu Han defeated the defenders and then joined up with the vanguard that had been trapped near Wu Yang for 2 or 3 months, once again surrounding Wu Yang. By now, just over 2 months had passed since Peng's death. This is what distinguished the Han dynasty, which already controlled most of the realm, from the separatist Chengjia regime. The Han could suffer repeated failures and quickly replace their losses. Chengjia, after one disastrous defeat, needed far too long to recover and had already squandered its strategic opportunity. Gongsun Shu sent his son-in-law with 5,000 men to the rescue, but they were struck head-on and annihilated. Wu Yang then fell into Han hands. Liu Xiu, who had been watching the campaign closely from the rear, ordered that the Han forces disregard other strongpoints and should concentrate their main strength on seizing Guangwu, south of Chengdu. Wu Han carried out this order. He massed his main force, captured Guangwu, and then dispatched light cavalry to push further north. Han vanguard units reached the outskirts of Chengdu and set fire to the market bridge over the Jinjiang River outside the southwestern gate of the city. The flames soared into the sky visible from within Chengdu. Some of Gongsun Shu's subordinates began to leave the city and surrendered towns and troops to the Han. Liu Shu again wrote to Gongsun Shu urging surrender, explicitly stating that if he capitulated in time, the court would spare his clan and would not even pursue the assassination charges. Gongsun Shu did not accept. But by now, the northern route front had also advanced from the southern Long Mountains into the Chengdu plain, and the eastern detachment that had earlier used surrendered soldiers to impersonate a main force absorbed further surrendering troops along the way and was gradually approaching the Chengdu plain from the northeast, coming under Wu Han's unified command. In this final stage, over 100,000 soldiers and civilians were still inside Chengdu. Gongsun Shu concentrated his remaining forces, preparing to use the city walls, the rivers, and outer encampments to continue the defense. Liu Shu issued a specific edict ordering Wu Han to hold Guangwu and not to be in a hurry to assault the city. Wu Han did not follow the edict. Believing the defenders' morale was broken, he decided to press his advantage and move directly to the city's edge. He took over 20,000 infantry and cavalry out of Guangwu and camped on the northern bank of the Jinjiang River, south of Chengdu, while his deputy, with over 10,000 men, camped on the southern bank. He also built a pontoon bridge so the two wings could communicate. On the surface, this deployment seemed to encircle the city from both banks, but in reality it split the Han army into two parts, separated by more than 10 kilometers and divided by the river. If the Shu forces cut the pontoon bridge, the two groups could not rapidly support each other. When Liu Shu received word of this, he immediately recognized the danger. In an edict, he sharply rebuked Wu Han for underestimating the enemy and rashly advancing, pointing out that two armies camped on opposite banks with head and tail unable to rescue each other was a fundamental military blunder, and he ordered him to withdraw at once to Guangwu. But the edict was still on its way when the Chengdu army sallied forth. In the 9th month of AD 36, Gongsun Shu sent forth an army of more than 100,000. He divided his forces into over 20 camps and concentrated his attack on Wu Han on the north bank, while simultaneously sending over 10,000 men across the river to the south to pin down the southern Han force and prevent it from coming to the rescue. Wu Han fought from morning until dusk, and as his troops gradually gave way, he was forced to withdraw into his camp. The Shu army promptly surrounded the camp, controlling the nearby roads and fords. The Han troops on the north bank were completely cut off from those on the south, and the pontoon bridge that Wu Han had built was now under Shu surveillance. In this deep crisis, Wu Han finally came to his senses and decided to cross back to the south bank in secret. He kept the entire army inside the camp for 3 consecutive days. Inside, cook fires smoked as usual. More banners were displayed than normal, and defenders constantly moved along the ramparts to make the Shu army believe that the Han still intended to hold out. Then, on the 3rd night, the whole army silently struck camp, left the camp in order, and crossed the river at fords that had been secured in advance. Wu Han did not take all the banners with him and ordered that lamps be left burning in the empty camp. Tens of thousands of Han soldiers, withdrawing right under the enemy's eyes, had all reached the south bank and reunited before dawn. The next day, the Shu army still thought the Han were trapped in their camp. Leaving a part of their force to watch the north bank, they shifted their main strength to the south bank, intending to annihilate the southern Han force first. But after crossing the river, what they faced was no longer a detached force of just over 10,000 men, but the entire reunited Han army. Wu Han concentrated his infantry and cavalry and launched a counterattack from early morning. The Shu troops had been fighting continuously, and with a portion of their force left watching the empty camp on the north bank, their formation could not hold together. The battle raged until dusk, and finally the Han smashed the Shu main body. All the senior Shu commanders were killed in the fighting. The 20-odd camps that had surrounded Wuhan then collapsed, and the Chengdu forces retreated back into the city. Wuhan, having learned his lesson from the rash advance, pulled his army back to Guangwu. After withdrawing to Guangwu, Wuhan adjusted his strategy and advanced methodically, taking the outer encampments, roads and fords one by one. From the 9th to the 11th month, the Han forces pressed continuously between Guangwu and Chengdu. The histories record that Wuhan fought 8 battles and won 8 victories. Gongsun Shu repeatedly sent troops out of the city in attempts to retake the roads and cut the Han supply lines, but Wuhan met them from his fortified camps, repulsed them, and then advanced again. With each success, the Han demolished part of the outer defences and occupied new fords and camps. The Chengdu garrison still had numerical superiority, but could operate only in an ever-shrinking space. Meanwhile, the Han army in the north also continued its advance. Towns north of Chengdu fell one after another, and Han forces closed in on Chengdu from the north, joining Wuhan to form a complete encirclement. The territory Gongsun Shu controlled had shrunk from the entire Shu region to Chengdu and its immediate environs. Even so, the Chengdu army did not cease its counterattacks. After a string of defeats, Gongsun Shu accepted his senior general's argument that hoarding treasure was now pointless. They had to concentrate their last elite forces and seek out the Han army's weak spots. Gongsun Shu brought out gold, silver and rolls of cloth and recruited among the city's population men willing to fight, eventually raising over 5,000. They were formed into a dare-to-die corps, led by Chengjia's foremost general, and sallied out from the southwest. The Shu forces did not charge the Han camp directly. Instead, they first raised a multitude of banners at the bridgehead and ordered their soldiers to beat drums and issue challenges, drawing Wuhan's attention to the front. Seeing what appeared to be a modest Shu force, Wuhan led his army forward, intent on encircling and annihilating this unit. Once battle was joined, the Shu troops deliberately gave ground as they fought, pulling the Han forward. Meanwhile, another Shu force used concealed paths to circle around behind Wuhan and launched a sudden attack. Assailed front and rear, the Han formation rapidly fell apart. Wuhan, who had been directing operations at the front, found his retreat cut off by the Shu, and he was forced to flee toward the river with his personal guard. In the chaos, he fell into the water and managed to reach the bank only by grabbing the tail of a warhorse. The Han army was defeated and retreated to its camp. With just over 5,000 men, the Shu had driven back the Eastern Han main force that had previously won 8 straight battles. Tragically, this near-miraculous victory was to be the Chengjia regime's last. This defeat again worsened Wuhan's position. The army had only 7 days' grain left, and although most of the surrounding roads were in Han hands, supply transport had not yet been fully restored. Wuhan secretly prepared boats, intending to abandon the outer positions around Chengdu and retreat down the river. At this critical juncture, another official forcefully argued against it, saying he must not give up when they were so close. Wuhan accepted this assessment. He halted the withdrawal, reorganized his camps, and deliberately reduced his attacks, making the Chengdu garrison believe that the Han army had been shaken by the defeat at the market bridge. Inside Chengdu, however, the end was also near. In the 11th month, the encircling Han forces had pushed from the north to the vicinity of Chengdu's north gate. while Wuhan still controlled the positions south of the city and along the river. All the main routes connecting Chengdu to the outside world were now in Han hands. Moreover, other key strongholds in Shu, including Jiangzhou, had fallen one after another. No relief force would ever reach the city. Gongsun Shu decided to stake everything on one final battle. The historical records say that before the fight, he consulted a divination text and came across the phrase, "The caitiff shall die beneath the walls." He interpreted caitiff to mean the Han army, believing that the Han commander would die beneath Chengdu's walls. This interpretation did not alter the balance of power, but it gave Gongsun Shu a reason to fight the last battle. He divided the remaining Chengdu forces into two parts, one to block the Han army to the north, while he himself led tens of thousands in a southward attack on Wuhan, hoping to smash one wing before the two Han armies could unite. The decisive battle began at dawn. On the northern front, the Shu forces attacked the Han 3 times and gained the upper hand each time, temporarily pinning down the northern route army. Gongsun Shu himself led his main force against Wuhan's positions. The Chengdu garrison was still substantial in numbers, and knowing there was no way back, fought with desperate ferocity. For a time, the Han troops could make no headway, and the battle raged from dawn until midday. But a problem soon arose. In order to strike before the two Han forces fully converged, Gongsun Shu's men had marched out of the city early in the morning and had been fighting ever since without any opportunity to eat. As the battle dragged on for hours, the Chengdu troops gradually became exhausted, and their once dense formations began to loosen. Although the Shu forces at the north gate held the advantage, they could not rout the Han army quickly, and therefore could not turn back to support Gongsun Shu. The two Shu wings were pinned down separately, and Gongsun Shu's initial plan to defeat the enemy in detail came to nothing. Wuhan waited until this very moment to commit his fresh reserves. He ordered his tens of thousands of well-rested, crack troops who had been held back awaiting orders to strike the front of the weary Chengdu main force. Han cavalry and infantry advanced together. Once the Shu front line was broken, the soldiers behind could no longer hold formation. Gongsun Shu was still directing the battle from within his ranks and did not withdraw back through the gate in time. A Han cavalry officer led his men in a charge that penetrated the Shu center, and with a long spear he stabbed Gongsun Shu through the chest. Gongsun Shu fell from his horse, and the soldiers around him carried him back into Chengdu. With their leader wounded, the Shu troops outside the city lost command and began retreating into the city. The Shu forces at the north gate, learning of the disaster, also abandoned their attack and fell back inside Chengdu. The victorious Han army did not immediately storm the gates, but instead reasserted control over the roads outside the city, completely besieging Chengdu. Gongsun Shu was carried into the palace and died of his wound that very night. 11 years had passed since he had proclaimed himself emperor in Chengdu in AD 25. He was the first emperor in Chinese history explicitly recorded as having died in battle. After Gongsun Shu's death, continuing to defend the city lost all meaning. The Shu army made no further attempt to resist. The next morning, the gates of Chengdu were opened and the city surrendered to Wuhan. In the 3 days after Chengdu surrendered, Wuhan did not treat the city according to the customary procedures for accepting a surrender. He ordered the execution of Gongsun Shu's wife and children and continued the hunt to exterminate the entire Gongsun clan. Even the family of the high-ranking general who had presided over the city surrender was not spared. Afterwards, the Han soldiers were allowed to loot the city, and Gongsun Shu's palaces were set ablaze. The war was over. The gates had been opened, but the soldiers and civilians of Chengdu were still treated as objects of the victor's wrath. This massacre was not a brief bout of chaos born of uncontrolled fighting. There was no longer any force in the city capable of organizing resistance. Wuhan, nonetheless, chose to exterminate the clan and unleash his soldiers, extending the culpability for the assassinations of Lai Shi and Sen Peng and the prolonged defiance of the Han army to Gongsun Shu's family and the ordinary inhabitants of Chengdu. When word reached Liu Xiu, he was furious. He severely rebuked Wuhan and specifically chastised Deputy Commander Liu Shang. The city had already surrendered, yet there were still tens of thousands of elderly, children, and ordinary officials. The Han army should have executed the chief culprits and pacified the people. But instead, it had let the troops run amok and set fires after the surrender had been accepted. But while the angry edict was issued, Liu Xiu imposed no real punishment. After all, it had been 20 years of bloodshed and chaos since the realm had begun to fall apart in AD 14, and more than half the population had perished in warfare, famine, and disease. The tragedy of Chengdu's ordinary people was simply the final footnote to that age of turmoil. Fortunately, it was the last.